About request dispatcher and send redirect mechanisms in the earlier class. Okay, let me list out the differences between them. Okay, request dispatcher can be used either to forward or include request dispatcher can be used either to forward or include the request and response objects to another servlet. Okay. The response dot send redirect is used to redirect. Response dot send redirect is used to redirect the response to the target. Response dot send redirect is used to redirect the response to the target. Okay. In case of request dispatcher, the same request and response objects will be sent from the source to the target. In case of request dispatcher, the same request and the same response objects will be sent from source to target. But will it be the same? Will it be the same in case of response.send redirect? No. In case of response.send redirect, the response will be bounced back to the browser, and from the browser a new request object will be created, which triggers the target. Okay. In case of send redirect, response will be bounced back to the browser, and from the browser a new request object will be created which triggers the target. Okay. In case of request dispatcher, browser is not aware of the target servlet. Browser is not aware of the target servlet to which the request is dispatched. Browser is not aware of the target servlet to which the request is dispatched. But in case of response.send redirect, browser is aware of the changes. The browser address bar is aware of the changes. So the target servlet will be displayed in the browser address bar. Okay. Request dispatcher can be used for both get and post. Okay. Request dispatcher can be used for both get as well as post. Whereas response.send redirect, since in the process of send redirect, a new request is triggered from the browser, which is a GET request, In process of send redirect, a new request is triggered from the browser. Which is a GET request. So post requests are not possible in case of send redirect. Post requests are not possible in case of send redirect. Only GET request will be triggered. Post requests are not possible in case of send redirect. So, in case of request dispatcher, we can override either do GET or do post. But in case of send redirect, we should override do GET. In case of request dispatcher, for that reason, in case of request dispatcher, we can override do GET or do post in the target servlet. For that reason, in case of request dispatcher, in the target servlet, we can override either do GET or do post. But in case of send redirect, in the target servlet, definitely, for sure, we should override do GET. And a request dispatcher can be created in two ways, using request object and select context object. Request object and select context object. Request dispatcher can be created in two ways. The first way is using request object. The second way is using select context object. And response redirect mechanism can be triggered using response.send redirect. Redirect mechanism will be triggered using response.send redirect. And for request dispatcher, we can give either absolute or relative path as a URL. For request dispatcher, we can give either absolute or relative path as a URL. But for send redirect, we should give the absolute path of the URL. But for send redirect, we should give absolute path of the URL. If you want to communicate from one context to another context, that means from one web application to another web application. If you want to communicate from one context to another context, that means from one web application to another web application. In case of request dispatcher, we should create a request dispatcher using select context. And the second thing, we should pass the absolute URL. And the third thing is we should configure that in the context.xml. We should configure in context.xml in such a way that the first context can interact with second context. We should configure in context.xml in such a way that first context can interact with second context. But if you want to achieve the same, if you want to achieve the same in response.sendRedirect, what we can do is just directly response.sendRedirect of the absolute path of the second context. Just we go for response.sendRedirect of the absolute path of the target servlet in the second context. Let's consider like this is my application. I want to redirect to Google Maps.locate. So now if I want to achieve a cross-context communication. Cross-context communication means communicating from one servlet of one context to another servlet of another context. If we want to achieve that using response.sendRedirect, this is a direct mechanism. It's a single step way. Just have the context, have the URL of the servlet, target servlet, along with the context name. That's it. It will redirect to that particular servlet. So it's a very easy process in case of send redirect. Understood? Understood the differences between request dispatcher and send redirect? And what is the difference between request.getRequestDispatcher and servlet context.getRequestDispatcher? List out the differences yourself. Differences between request.getRequestDispatcher and servlet context.getRequestDispatcher. Just list out the differences. I'll give a minute to you. List out the differences between request.getRequestDispatcher, or list out the differences between request.dispatcher object that is created through request object and the request dispatcher that is created through servlet context object. Request dispatcher that is created through request object and request dispatcher that is created through servlet context object. List out the differences between them. It's a shame on your part if you are listing the differences by turning the notes. It's a pity on your part. Okay, then what are the differences? What's the difference between request.getRequestDispatcher and select context.getRequestDispatcher? Or the request dispatcher which is created by request object and request dispatcher which is created by select context object. What are the differences?
In case of request.getDispatcher, it cannot use between the two context or two parameters. But the servlet.getDispatcher can be used between the two contexts. In case of request.getDispatcher, only direct path can be used as a URL.
So direct path is a relative.
But in case of servlet.getDispatcher, only absolute path is used as the URL. And we can transfer the same request parameter by include method in case of request.getDispatcher. But here we cannot transfer the request parameter between the.
Did I tell that we cannot transfer the request parameters using select context.getRequestDispatcher?
We cannot transfer the request parameter between the application.
But select context.getRequestDispatcher can be used even between two different servlets of the same web application. When we use select context.getRequestDispatcher to interact between multiple web applications, then we cannot send the request parameters. We can use select context.getRequestDispatcher even to interact between two different web resources in the same web application. In that case, we can transfer request parameters. Okay? Yeah, that's good. And list out the differences between request dispatcher dot forward and include. Request dispatcher dot forward and request dispatcher dot include. Then what are the differences? Did you list out them?
In case of request dispatcher or forward, if we have source servlet and target servlet, so firstly the response will be
See, do we have source and target servlet only in case of forward?
no, inside that we have two methods. First, if you clear the response buffer, then it will send request. But in case of request dispatcher input, it will first send the response, then it will send the request.
No. Did I tell that first it will send the response and it will send the request? Did I tell that in case of include, it will first send the response and then it will send the request? Did I tell that? Did I tell that? Yes? Did I tell that? I am asking you. Did I tell that first the response will be sent and then the request will be sent in case of include?
The response of first servlet will include the target, then only the request.
That's what I told. The response of the source will be included in the target, then request and response will be transferred to the target. Okay? In case of request dispatcher dot forward, okay, before forwarding the request and response to the target, first the response of the source will be cleared. Response buffer of the source will be cleared, and then only the request will be transferred from source to the target. In case of include, first the response of the source will be included in the target, then the request and response are transferred to the target servlet. Then when we go for forward and when we go for include.
If you want to build presentation last servlet,
Hmm.
you will go for forward.
Mhm.
But then if you want to write the presentation logic in every servlet,
Hmm.
so you will go for request dispatcher input.
Okay, that's the second difference. Then what is the third difference? Anyhow, already we have discussed. Okay, the response of the last target servlet only included in the browser if you go for forward. If you go for include, all the target servlet response will be included in the browser. If you go for forward, only the last target servlet response will be included in the browser. But if you go for include mechanism, all the servlet responses will be included in the browser. Some of the interviewers will ask like, will it be better to go for forward or will it be better to go for include? Okay, it's not like forward is better or include is better. Forward will be used in a case where the presentation logic will be written in only one servlet, the last servlet. Include will be used if the presentation logic will be written in all the servlets. Tell that and add a last word. Like personally, I prefer to forward just because, as per my knowledge, it is better to write presentation logic in only one servlet. Just tell that forward will be used in this case and include will be used in this case, and tell a last word that for me, as per my knowledge, okay, as per my opinion, it's better to go for forward. Okay, just because it's a correct design to implement the presentation logic only in one servlet rather than implementing the presentation logic in all the servlets. Just add that last word. Okay? That's what. That's how you need to learn things. Differences. Differences are very important for interviews. Definitions, explanations, differences, performance. These are the multiple dimensions that the interviewer may concentrate for every concept. Definitely, if we have 10 questions, at least 2 or 3 will be based on differences. What's the difference between this and that? Why, when I should go for this, when I should go for that? When I should go for array list, when I should go for vector? When I should go for a set, when I should go for a map? What's the difference? Okay? At least 3 questions among 10 questions will be differences. So, then the next topic that we are going to discuss is session management, or some people will call this as session tracking. Okay? Then, before discussing session tracking or session management, let me tell you an example. Okay? Just all of us have Gmail accounts. Okay? When I try to log in into my Gmail account, okay, using my username and password, okay, using my email ID and password, I'll get my home page. From my home page, I'll compose a mail. After composing a mail, I'll check in the sent box, I'll send that mail. First, I'll go to my home page. From home page, on the left hand side, I'll click on compose. So, the compose page will be displayed. From compose, I'll attach file. So that files will be attached. Okay? And I'll type the content, I'll send the mail. Okay? And that mail will be sent. Okay? And back, again, response will come back to the home page. From home page, what I'll do is, to verify whether the mail has been sent or not, just I'll go to the sent box, okay, and I'll confirm that yes, my mail has been sent. From sent box, again I'll come back to the home page, okay, and I'll check the draft. I'll add that mail into the drafts. So, we have performed, in this process, we have performed, or we have created at least 8 to 9 requests, right? Login is one request, okay, and if the login request is successful, then we'll go to home page. From home page, going to the compose page is another request, okay, submitting a compose page, sending a mail is another request, and once the mail is sent, okay, redirecting to home page is another request, and from the home page going to send box is another request, from send box going to home page is another request, again from home page going to drafts is another request, saving the mail into drafts is another request, and from the draft going to home page is another request. So we have performed multiple requests, we have created multiple requests in this process. Now, in this process, now is the credentials like username and password or the email ID, are those credentials available in all the pages? Are those credentials available in all the pages? Or are we giving the credentials for each and every action? Let's consider like I have logged in, I'm on the home page. When I try to compose mail, do I give the credentials once again? No, I don't give. I don't give the credentials again. But how the credentials are available? How the credentials are available in the compose page or when I send the mail? The credentials, the username and password are available only in the login request. That means from the browser, I'll give username, password, and submit. Okay. Then if I submit the form, it will come to the server. In the server, it will execute something like login servlet, and the response of login servlet will be bounced back to the browser. Okay. In the browser, now it is a home page where I have list of mails and okay, inbox, sent items, like this, and compose mail. When I click on compose mail, again the control will go to the server, to some other servlet, and the response of the servlet will be displayed here, which has a compose mail window. Okay? So, now if you send the username and password, okay, they will be sent as request parameters to login servlet. Are those request parameters which we have sent to login servlet available to this compose servlet? Understood my point? If you send username and password while login, the login username and password will be sent as request parameters from the browser to login servlet. And from login servlet we have bounced the response back to the browser, and from the browser again we are clicking on compose. So a new request is generated. For that new request, are the request parameters username and password available? Yes? See, first in the browser we will have the login page where username, password will be available when you click on submit. Leave about Gmail. Think in the context of servlets. Okay? Now when we click on submit, a request will be transferred to login servlet, and from the login servlet the response will be sent back to the browser. Okay? In the browser, we will display the home page where we have compose option. Just select login servlet has a request which has request parameters username, password. Okay? Compose, set box, and graphics. Now, in the compose mail, what we'll do, we click on compose, then the control will be transferred to another servlet which is like compose servlet. Then, for this request, are these request parameters available? Then you don't know servlets. Then you don't have the knowledge of servlets. You won't be available just because it is a new request. It is a new request. Since it is a new request, the earlier request parameters will not be available for the new request. But how this compose servlet will get username and password when it wants to send a mail to some other person? If you send a mail to some other person, then our details will be displayed to that person. Yeah, this is the username. From this username at this time, we have received some mail. But how the details will be sent to them if you don't have the email ID with us? The email ID, the username and password are there with this request. But how the parameters of this request will be available to this request? If it is request dispatching, the same request will be dispatched from one servlet to another servlet. But is this the case now? No, it's not the case. We are creating a new request. But still, the credentials should be available even for new requests. How we can make them available? Means we should manage the session. Okay? That's how the session will be managed. That's how the session will be used practically. Okay? If you want to share some information between multiple requests of the same web application, if you want to share some information across the requests of a web application, if you want to share some information across the requests of a web application, if you want to share some information across the requests of a web application, then we manage the session. Then we manage the session. Okay. If there is some information which is supposed to be shared across the requests, across multiple requests. If there is some information that is supposed to be shared across multiple requests, then in that case we manage the session. Okay. In case of web applications developed using Java technology, we have 4 different ways of session management. Okay. Session management is a concept where we manage some information or we share some information across multiple requests of the same web application. But that can be achieved. That session management or session tracking can be achieved in 4 different ways. In Java technology, in web applications developed using Java technology. The first approach of session tracking is using hidden form fields. The first approach of session management is using hidden form fields. And the second approach is using URL rewriting. And the third approach is using cookies. The third approach of session management is using cookies. The fourth approach is using the fourth way of session management is using JavaX.servlet.http servlet object. HTTP session object. These are the 4 different ways where we can manage a session. In general, most of the cases, session will be used to carry some information between a successful login and logout. Between a successful login and logout, if you want to carry some information, that information will be there in the session. Between a successful login and logout, if you want to carry some information, in general, in a practical scenario, In a practical scenario, in between a successful login and logout, if you want to carry some information, that information will be stored in the session. Now, can we tell that session is specific to the login user? Can we tell that session is specific to the login user? Yes. In a practical scenario, session will be specific to login user. If the user logs into the application, user may create some 1,000 requests. 1,000 compose mails or 1,000 times he can go for sandbox. He can do whatever he wants to do. But for all the 1,000 requests, it will be only one session. Okay? In between a successful login and logout of a user, if you want to carry some information, we maintain that information in a session. That means something like information which is specific to the user. Session will be specific to the user in a practical scenario. Okay? If there are 1,000 users in the application, each and every user will have his own session. Okay? Now, I forgot one thing in request dispatching. Okay? How we can share the information between two different requests in request dispatching. Okay? That I forgot. First I'll discuss that, and then I'll discuss these different approaches of session management. Hidden form fields, URL rewriting, cookies, and HTTP server. Okay? I forgot a small concept in case of request dispatcher. Okay, let me try to dispatch the request from let me try to dispatch the request from login servlet to first servlet. Okay, I'm dispatching the request from login servlet to first servlet. Now, if I want to send some information other than request parameters, if I want to share some information between one servlet and another servlet in a request dispatching mechanism, understood? In a request dispatching mechanism, other than request parameters, if you want to share some information from one servlet to another servlet, okay, then we add them as request attributes. Let's consider that in this first servlet, we have a list of states. Retrieved from database. Okay, just let's consider this as a requirement. Okay, we get the list of states from the login servlet, and Let's say I'm hard coding that, but let's consider like it will be fetched from the database. Okay, so let me add so now I have a state list. It is can I call it as an object? Can I call state list as an object? It is a array list object. Okay, even a collection is also a object. So let me import them. List, array list. Okay, now I have added a state list. Let's consider like I have created that in the login servlet, and I want to pass this information. I want to pass the state list to the target servlet, first servlet. From login servlet, I want to pass this information to first servlet. But can I pass this information through request parameters? Can I pass this information created in this servlet as a request parameter? Understood my question? See, I have a list. Can I pass this list to the target servlet as a request parameter? Can we send this list to the target servlet as a request parameter? No, just because we cannot set a request parameters in the servlet. We can only get a request parameter, that's it. We cannot modify or we cannot set or we cannot add a request parameter to a request object from the servlet. Okay? We cannot add or we cannot set or we cannot modify a request parameter to a request object from the servlet. It's not possible. We cannot add, we cannot set, we cannot modify a request parameter to a servlet. A request parameter to a request object from the servlet. From the servlet, we cannot add, we cannot modify, or we cannot set a request parameter to the request object. Okay? So, we cannot send that information as a request parameter. Now, how we can send that information means, in the request, we can have both parameters as well as attributes. There is a method named set attribute. Name of the attribute and value of the attribute. Okay. In case of request object, we can set some sort of attributes. Okay. The attribute data type should be string. The attribute name should be a string. Attribute value can be any object. It can be person object or employee object or a list or a set or a map. It can be any object. The request attribute value can be any object, but the attribute name should be a string. Request attribute value can be any object, but request attribute name should be a string. Request attribute name should be a string. The attribute value can be any object. So if you go for the target servlet, which is first servlet, okay, let me print the values. The state list is, to get the attribute value, just we go for request dot get attribute. The name of the attribute. What is the name of the attribute that we have given here? It's states, states. So the same attribute I have given here. Now let me copy and give the same thing in the second servlet also. Okay, that's what the case is. Okay. Now, let me see whether the request attributes will be available in first servlet and second servlet. Okay. Now let me try to compile the application. If you want to set the attribute, or if you want to set or add is one and the same. Okay. Yes, if you want to add the attribute, then we go for request dot set attribute. If you want to fetch or if you want to get the attribute value based on the name, then we go for get attribute. Set attribute, get attribute. Okay. Now let me try to compile the application. Just let me stop the server. Compile the application. Application is being compiled. Let me start the server. Server is being started. Let me try to access the same application. Okay. Request is being dispatched to the target servlet. So you need first servlet. It's a do post login servlet. But why it is was it not compiled? First it has come to login servlet. So this is include. Let me forward. Restore the server. This is the first servlet. From the first servlet I am forwarding to second servlet. Sorry. File the application. Start the server. Post is not supported by this URL. And one more thing, in a request dispatcher mechanism, okay, all the requests or all the servlets should have the same method overridden. See, if the request of the source servlet is get, then in all the servlets we should override do get method. In the request on if the request in the servlet source servlet is post, then all the servlets should override the do post method. Understood? Let's consider like first the request comes to login servlet, and then first and then second. Okay? Then in the login servlet, if you override do post method, even in the respective servlets, first servlet as well as second servlet also we should override do post method. If you want to dispatch the request from login first and first to second. Okay? Understood? If you want to dispatch a request from source to target, both the source and target should override the same business method, either do get or do post. Now, the response is sent to the second servlet. Okay? Let us see. In the second servlet, are these values available or not? In the second servlet, are these values available? Yes or no? In the first servlet, are these values available? Yes or no? Yes. Now, are request attributes available beyond the request? Let's consider like I have one request and I have another request. Are these request attributes available beyond the request? I have two requests, and for the first request I have added some attributes. Will these attributes available for the second request? No, just because request attributes will be confined or will be specific to that request. Once the request is expired means even the request attributes also will be expired. The attributes added to that request will be expired. Okay? The request attributes will be used only in a request dispatching mechanism. Request attributes can be used at maximum only in a request dispatching mechanism. Just because if we dispatch the request from one servlet to another servlet, the same request will be dispatched. So, request attributes will be available. Can we use these request attributes in case of send redirect mechanism? Can we make use of these request attributes in send redirect mechanism? Can we make use of these request attributes in send redirect? Yes or no? No. Why? Why request attributes cannot be used in case of send redirect? Shekhar, you tell. Understood my question? Some people are telling that, like Ashok or somebody else, they are telling that request attributes cannot be used in send redirect. Okay? Yes, it is correct. Request attributes cannot be used in send redirect. Why? Except the two guys, those who tell the answer, remaining people think about that. Why request attributes cannot be used in case of send redirect mechanism? Even request dispatcher also will transfer request as well as response to the target. In case of send redirect, request attributes will not be available. Why? Request attributes can be used only in case of request dispatch mechanism. Request attributes cannot be used in case of send redirect. Why? Request parameters are different, attributes are different. Did they tell that request parameters and attributes are one and the same? Or did they tell that request attributes will go in form of request parameters? No. Request parameters are different, request attributes are completely different.
We can have any number of attributes.
Even 100.
So here we are able to get methods.
It's a simple thing. Not a thing that much complex. Why request attributes will not be available for send redirect? That's a perfect answer. In case of send redirect, okay, from the source, when we try to redirect to the target, first the response will hit the browser, and from the browser, a new request will be generated to the target. So, for a new request attributes will not be available. Request attributes will be available only for that request. But in case of request dispatcher mechanism, the same request is shared between multiple servlets. The same request is shared from source to target. So, request attributes will be available. But in case of send redirect, the response will go to the browser and a new request, a brand new request will be generated from the browser. So, since it is a brand new request, the existing request attributes will not be available to the new request. For that reason, we cannot pass the information from source to target in form of request attributes for send redirect. Request attributes can be used, or request attributes are useful only in case of request dispatching mechanism. There are three methods related to attributes in the request object. One is set attribute, to set the attribute or to add the attribute to the request object. Second one is get attribute, to get the attribute, that we have already discussed. Okay? Set attribute. Set attribute, to set the attribute, or something like to add the attribute to the request object. Okay? And set attribute will take the name of the attribute and the value of the attribute. The name of the attribute should be a string. The value can be any object. And if you give the same key twice, or if you give the same name twice, let's consider like if I give request dot set attribute of states as state list and request dot set attribute states as HCU. This is junk value, just ignore that. Okay? But the same attributes, the same name of attribute is repeated twice. Then what it will do means it will override the existing value with the latest value. It will override the existing value with the latest value. So now if we, in the first servlet, if we execute the request dot get attribute, will it give the list of states or will it give HCU? It will give HCU here, just because if you give the same request attribute name twice, the latest value will override the existing value. So, if you set the request dot set attribute like this, request dot set attribute states as some list of states, and again if you set request dot set attribute states as some HCU, then what is the value of that request attribute means? The latest value. Latest value will override the existing value. Set attribute. If you use set attribute. Okay? We have, if you want to add attribute, we use set attribute. If you want to update the attribute value, then also we use set attribute with the same name but the updated value. Okay? And if you want to get the attribute, just we use dot request dot get attribute or the name of the attribute. Okay? And if you want to remove the attribute, then there will be the same method. Request dot remove attribute of the same value. Set attribute, get attribute, and remove attribute. These are the three